What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. For today's video, we're going to be checking out the Transformers Studio Series Bumblebee movie, Core Class Decepticon Rumble. Yet another character unfortunately completely missing in action when it came round to the final cut of the film, despite the figure seemingly being based on a completed yet unused CG design, although much like some of the on-screen characters, a pretty great translation from G1 into live action, although I do think he could have looked even better had Hasbro based this more off the comic book design. There is a comic out there which does directly take place after the events of the Bumblebee movie, and that design for Rumble I do think is a little more interesting when it comes to a live action movie take on the character, and it would have been wicked to have seen that translated into an action figure. But as we check out the details, the head sculpt is easily recognisable as the OG character, although I do think it's a little too simplistic for a movie figure. Even compared to the 86 release, it is sadly missing quite a few details. They've instead opted to go with a mouth guard instead of the mouth design, so that definitely does look a lot cleaner than I would expect from a live action movie release. But as we check out the details, the cybernetics for the chest unit are looking wicked, and I also really like the leg design. As we check out the pile drivers by themselves, they're also packing a pair of shocks along the side, and they are honestly kind of interesting in their design because they do not remove. They are permanent fixtures, meaning that when you transform him, he does stay together in one complete piece, which definitely is a positive. But the downside to that is that he is designed to go inside Soundwave's chest, so they are limited to the size of his chest cavity, meaning that I definitely think they are on the smaller side even compared to the CG render on the front of the box. And because these are easily his most iconic weapons, I think it would have been awesome had maybe Hasbro engineered a sliding system so that we at the very least could have extended them just a tiny bit, because unfortunately the figure struggles to recreate the iconic first we crack the shell, then we crack the nuts inside pose. But I did think it was pretty sweet how on the underside he is packing a pair of Decepticon insignias, meaning that when he is grounding and pounding the Autobots, he is imprinting them with the Decepticon logo. Now as we check him out here from the back, because he is easily one of the smallest core class releases today, it is pretty sweet to see them completely fill him in, and I also quite like the suspension detail that again we have embedded in the back of the legs. So it's definitely overall a solid design, one that I could definitely imagine appearing in the Bumblebee movie, although for a live action movie take on the character, I definitely think at the very least could have been a little more detailed. Now, as we check out his accessories, because he unfortunately doesn't have any actual hands, his two blasters do store on the back as back cannons. Now, these have been very nicely detailed, and to be fair, I definitely think make the design a little more interesting, especially from the front. Although, I definitely think their main purpose is to be combined and paired with Soundwave. So kind of carrying on the trends that were set by Ravage, where he also included an additional weapon for this guy, Rumble does form a tiny Cybertronian pistol, which I'm gonna be honest guys, I'm not quite sure what use Soundwave would get out of it, especially as just by himself, he is already packing that massive over-the-shoulder cannon. So in some ways, I wish maybe Hasbro had scrapped this idea completely in favour of giving him some slightly better engineered pile drivers. Now, as we check out Rumble's posability, it is honestly kind of interesting. So the head is on a ball joint. This will look up, it will look down, it can then rotate both left to right. The shoulders will move forwards, they will move backwards, they will hinge upwards. Due to the way he transforms, technically he's also packing a double elbow bend, although that definitely does begin to look a little strange. There is no waist joint, although he does include an ab crunch, which goes forwards and backwards, although if you do decide to completely straighten him out, from certain angles, it does kind of look like he is missing a piece of his torso, and that can definitely look a little strange from some angles. But the hips will kick forwards to that far, they will then go backwards all the way, they can hinge out to the sides, and one thing which I really like about this release is that most of the joints are pinned on. So whereas little pieces like this would be easily lost, they are all connected super securely, so that's brilliant. In terms of the knees, these can bend to 90, they can also rotate left to right, and due to the way he transforms, the foot can also pivot upwards and downwards. So not terrible articulation, definitely on par with what we have previously seen from the Studio Series 86 version, but to see what he is truly capable of, now let's put him through the pose test. Now, checking out some comparisons, we will be going in order from tallest to smallest. So first up we have the absolute beast, the concept art Megatron. And I find it kind of crazy that for a movie titled Bumblebee, there are more figures in this subline than I believe for any of the other live action movies. So with the release of these two concept art designs, it definitely makes me think as to what other characters we could potentially see in the future. Here is the Bumblebee movie Voyager class Optimus Prime, Cybertronian Starscream, Megatron's loyal communications expert Soundwave, and as a pairing these guys look wicked. With the release of this concept art Rumble, I can now only hope that in the future we can finally see a Bumblebee movie version of Laserbeak, Voyager class Shockwave, Decepticon Thrust / Acid Storm, Voyager class Thundercracker, and I think it's really cool that both of these figures share a very similar shade of metallic blue plastic. And with the release of Thundercracker, I believe with the exception of Skywarp, that pretty much wraps up all of the on-screen characters that featured throughout that opening Cybertron battle sequence. So in a way, I am so glad now that Hasbro have introduced this concept art series, as we can continue what has got to be one of the best sublines that we've so far seen in the studio series. Next up, for some deluxes, we have Cybertronian B127 and Ironhide. And then for two average size core classes, we have the Rise of the Beasts RC and the Bumblebee movie Shockwave. So much like the Studio Series 86 version, Rumble is most definitely on the smaller side. Which, speaking of, here we have the OG G1 version on the right. Now, I can tell you guys straight away that the Studio Series 86 version is way more bang for your buck. The pile drivers are much larger, he feels a lot more substantial. This figure, for accessories, comes with two blasters which are pretty much exactly the same size as the ones that this Rumble has on his back, whereas with this release you not only get them, but you get the two detachable pile drivers. Now, whilst I think it's cool that this guy stays together in one complete piece, I really personally would have rather his pile drivers at least be roughly the same size as what we have here from the OG release. I definitely think these are just way too short and stubby. And finally, there was no way I could round these comparisons off without checking out both Rumble and Ravage stacked up against each other. I will be real, guys, again, I do think Rumble is a little too simplistic for a live action movie character. I mean, as you compare him here to Ravage, Ravage had loads of sculpting in detail literally throughout the entire robot design, but especially when it came to that head sculpt. So should have they made this guy a little more detailed? Honestly, I definitely think so. Now, checking out Rumble's transformation, much like Ravage, it is super straightforward. So, for the first step, take the robot mode head, spin this all the way around so the back is now facing the front. Then what you'll do is compress the pile drivers up against each other so they are stacked exactly like this. Then you will rotate at the shoulder, make sure that the Decepticon insignia is facing forwards, and hinge upwards at the shoulder joint. Do the same here for this side, so basically break the pile drivers in half and begin compressing all of those tabs in, rotate at the shoulder, hinge this here upwards, then you'll take the tiny robot mode feet and snap these here into the shins, spin this guy around to the back, and on both sides of the legs are a set of tabs. Now these are designed so that we can store both blasters in this form, which I thought was pretty cool. So first of all, take a hold of the smaller one and line it up with this circular tab, so snap that in there, and then do exactly the same here for the larger one. So port that in there, and then what you'll do is just combine them directly down the middle. Then what you'll do is make use out of that ab crunch. So we're going to fold this here all of the way back just like that, and then to finish off the transformation, the hip joints are going to do most of the work. So on the underside are these tiny little tabs. They are going to slide into these little slots. So bring this here all the way back just like this. And bang! Here we have Rumble fully transformed, I guess, into his entry mode. My headcanon is that shortly after Optimus Prime and the Autobots flee Cybertron, Soundwave ejects Rumble into orbit in pursuit of B127, which is why in this form, he does vaguely resemble one of those original 2007 movie proto-forms, and whilst it does look quite basic in design, I definitely think it gets the job done. I think it's wicked from an engineering perspective how even the tiny little blasters store away inside. So definitely not a bad Cybertronian alt mode to accompany a pretty banging looking robot mode, but of course its true purpose is to be compatible with Soundwave. So as we drop that cassette deck, Rumble does very snugly store away inside Soundwave's chest, almost like one of those Energon cubes that this guy originally produced back in the 80s, and I think that looks wicked. I am now hoping more than ever that this time next year we can hopefully see the release of a concept art version of Laserbeak, because you really can't have Soundwave without Laserbeak. He is by far one of his most iconic cassette minions. But yes, the cassette deck also does very nicely snap back into place. So as I mentioned, Soundwave has noticed the Autobots fleeing Cybertron. He now ejects Rumble into space to crash land on Earth, and that is how the sequel to the Bumblebee movie kicks off. Now, as we check out some alt mode comparisons, on the right hand side we have the OG G1 Rumble. Now, whilst it hands down would have been amazing to have seen this Cybertronian version more resemble how he originally appeared back in the 80s, I can completely understand as to why, from a design perspective, Hasbro have mostly avoided that. The chest cavity between the B-movie release compared to the Earthrise version are completely different, and because this is a Cybertronian Rumble, who's to say that on Cybertron this isn't what cassettes look like? Here is how he stacks up against Ravage. Now, both of these are more or less exactly the same size, as they need to fit inside the same chest unit of Soundwave, but I will be honest guys, I think Hasbro have done a better job here with Rumble than they did with Ravage, and to be fair, that's more of an issue with the design in the movie, because Rumble, as I mentioned, really reminds me of kind of a proto form, whereas with Ravage, he definitely in this form reminded me a little more of some compacted trash. And for a general size comparison, here we have the core class version of Shockwave. So much like in robot mode, Rumble, even in this form, is considerably smaller. And so, wrapping up on this review for the Transformers Studio Series Core Class Concept Art Rumble. Overall, it's a pretty cool figure, although I think when compared to the Studio Series 86 release, it definitely feels like you're getting a lot less for your money. If you were to compare the two, I just think the accessories for the previous version are a lot more substantial, especially when it comes to those pile drivers, and in some ways, whilst it's cool that this guy can stay together in one piece during transformation, those pile drivers definitely are way too small for his robot mode. I definitely wish, maybe they could have added some extensions. Perhaps those cannons on his back could have been made into some boosters which would attach onto the ends of the pile drivers, just to make them appear a little more substantial. I'm hoping that with the release of this guy in the future, we can see more characters which unfortunately never made it into the movie brought to life for this brand new concept art series. I would love to get your thoughts on Rumble down in the comment section below. I want to thank you all so much for watching, and until my next review, transform and roll out!